Who don't know me, I'm Kathleen Jeffries. I am so excited to greet everyone here for the Planning for Pollinators. This is our second community program of 2024. And I serve as the Vice President of the Unitarian Universalist Animal Ministry Board. Also attending are some board members, if they'd like to raise their hand and be recognized. And then we all need to know who Julie is. Julie, you can raise your hand because Julie has done a great job helping to create the materials. And she's also going to be monitoring the chat and Q&A. My role as moderator is going to watch the time and keep this moving along so we all have time for discussion after Chartrina's informational packed presentation. I'm going to take this moment to introduce Chartrina. Chartrina happens to be a really good friend of mine, so I'm very excited she's here with us. I can't begin to tell you how much I have learned from Chartrina. Chartrina has a long and deep philanthropic background. We've shared that she's had a 23-year journey in the nonprofit sector. She's got a deep-rooted passion for educational programs, and all animal related in Chartrina's case. She also helped with young human beings in literacy in the network of the WISE in Florida. So she's had a really diverse experience in both education and then in these kind of situations relating to animals. Right now, she's with the Butterfly Pavilion. And don't let that sound as limiting as it might, because this is an international effort that they have put forth. And it's not just butterflies, as you'll find out tonight. But she steers a dynamic team of educators, interpreters, and volunteers, orchestrating enriching experiences. And they have a very diverse audience of all ages. She creates and executes curriculum and outreach initiatives. The mission of the Butterfly Pavilion is the conservation of invertebrates and their respective habitats. I'm particularly excited to present this program because as UUAM, we believe in the interdependent web of life, and what more than all these invertebrates who are unsung heroes, unseen for many times, that we rely on so much for our whole world, our food, our beauty of our shrubs and our flowers. It's very important. So she's also at strategic planning, budgeting, fundraising, marketing, communications, operations, team development. She spearheaded several campaigns. And I also need to mention that for those of you, how many of you here were also at the Love Stories in February? At that time, when that program was developed, Chartrina was executive director of Love and Arms Animal Sanctuary, where it was filmed. So she had a part in creating that video that we all loved, and you'll recognize her because she was also in it. So without further ado, let me introduce Chartrina.
Thank you so much. It's such a pleasure for me to be here this evening talking about pollinators. And I just wanted to tell you a little bit about Butterfly Pavilion. It's the first standalone association of zoos and aquariums accredited nonprofit invertebrate zoo in the world. We are a leader in invertebrate knowledge, inspiration, and connection. And we really try to just help spread this knowledge across the country. So we not only work to conserve invertebrates in Colorado, but throughout the United States in projects all over the world. We're involved with Parnassius butterflies in Mongolia, bees and elephants in Tanzania, a butterfly farm in Sumatra that supports people, planet, and promise. And I'm happy to answer any questions at the end about these programs. We do environmental and ecological services nationally to businesses, communities, and homeowners. We also host online programs, adult programs, children's programs, not only locally, but virtually throughout the world. So we are passionate about what we do, and that is because of all the species in the world, 97% of them are invertebrates, and only 3% are vertebrates, beings with backbones. And they really are, we like to say they really are the exoskeleton of the earth, because without them, life would not exist. So scientists at the UN Convention on Biological Science conclude that about 150 species of animals are lost daily, and 97% approximately are invertebrates. That's an ongoing loss of biodiversity. It's a critical concern, and our efforts to protect endangered species in these habitats remain essential. The services that they perform, pollinating, dispersing seeds, food for wildlife, recycling nutrients, cleaning water, building reefs, are all critical for life to exist on the planet. So without them, our ecosystems would collapse. Yet they're often the little unsung heroes that are often imperiled by our activities. And so what we really want to say is that we can make a difference, and that's what we're all here to learn about today. I love this quote: "Pollination is the silent conversation between flower and insect, a dialogue that threads life through the tapestry of earth, reminding us that our smallest actions can hold the whisper of global impact." One of my favorites there. So what is pollination? We're just going to briefly review this. Imagine a bustling garden or a wildlife meadow, flowers in their vibrant hues beckoning pollinators like bees, butterflies, and hummingbirds. These pollinators are on a mission. It's a delicate dance to sustain life. They flit from bloom to bloom, seeking nectar and collecting pollen as they move. Those little pollen grains get stuck on their bodies. It's a powdery treasure that holds promise of a new life. Now, on the plant side, for plants, pollination is a very strategic game. They need to transfer pollen from one of the male part, the stamen, to the female part, the pistil of another flower. Some plants do rely on wind to carry their pollen, but others have evolved a more intimate approach. They court pollinators. They're looking for someone to do it for them. Then the pollinator gets a reward. So kind of nectar is the currency of this exchange. So flowers offer its sweet bribe to pollinators, that sweet nectar. If you do this for me, you get some nectar. And bees with their fuzzy bodies dive into the blossoms, sipping nectar and inadvertently picking up pollen. Butterflies, elegant and delicate, flutter from petal to petal, transferring life from one bloom to another. We even have vertebrates, hummingbirds and bats as well. So pollination is more than just a transaction. It's really a symphony of life. It ensures genetic diversity, adaptation, and survival. As pollinators move, they connect distant plants, weaving ecosystems together. So it's a really fragile balance. Pollination faces challenges. Pesticides, habitat loss, climate change threaten our pollinators, so we must protect them in this dance of life that shapes our world. So we're going to learn more about that. I'm going to introduce some of our pollinators, and tonight I'm going to focus on our invertebrate pollinators. So bats and do pollinate, but we're going to, and hummingbirds pollinate. They're our favorites as well. We're going to focus tonight on invertebrates. So who are some of the players in this game? We've got solitary bees we're going to learn about tonight, bumblebees, honeybees, wasps, butterflies, moths, beetles, and flies. We don't often think of flies as pollinators, but they're actually quite effective. So let's start with bees, wasp, Hymenoptera group. So solitary bees, raise your hand if you know about solitary bees. You do? Yeah? All right. So honeybees seem to be most well known, but they only represent a tiny fraction of all the bee species in the world. Worldwide, there's approximately 20,000 species of bees, with over 90% of them being solitary bees. In North America, there's over 3,600 species of bees, and again, more than 90% of them lead solitary lives. That means each female constructs and provides provisions for her own nest without any help from any members of her species. She does it all alone. These solitary bees play a crucial role in pollination, ensuring the continuation of life for many plants and crops. These solitary bees are usually not aggressive at all, and they're often stingless. And many plants and bees have developed like one-on-one, they're specialists. So some plants really are most effectively only pollinated by solitary bees. So they're essential pollinators, possessing very specialized anatomical structures that efficiently collect and transfer pollen. So they're very efficient pollinators. Pollination efficiency, as you can see here, honeybees are about a 50% efficiency. Bumblebees have 90% efficiency. Mason bees, which is a solitary bee, 95%, and leafcutter bees. How many of you ever went out to your rose plants and saw like they look like cuts? They cut a leaf and then they take it back up and they wrap like their little baby, that little hole, and then they lay their little larva in that leaf. So they create like a little bed for their larva. And so those are the leafcutter bees, and there's so many fascinating bees, but pollination efficiency refers to the effectiveness of a pollinator in transferring pollen from one flower to another. It kind of quantifies how well a floral visitor contributes to the female plant's fitness by depositing pollen on the stigma of each measure. And this is important for our plants too. So making sure that our native bees, wherever we live, have the resources that they need to live is really important for the diversity of the ecosystems. Honeybees are not native to North America. They were brought over by European colonists starting in the 1620s. They were initially brought over as a source of wax and sugar. Native American called them the white man's flies because they noticed these insects before the humans did. So when they brought, I don't even know if it was on purpose if they brought them, but unlike native bees, honeybees are domesticated animals and not part of North America's natural fauna. 1930s, as modern agriculture expanded, habitats that supported native pollinators were displaced. To address this, someone had the idea to box up honeybees and move them around the country to pollinate crops. Today, beekeepers contribute over 15 billion to crop production annually. And honeybee colonies face several challenges due to pesticides, so beekeepers have their challenges as well. But some of the parasites and diseases that cause colony collapse and disorder can also hurt our native bees as well. So despite 40% of colonies each year being lost, honeybees are not at the risk of extinction, and their global population is higher than ever. But our solitary bees are in trouble, as well as our bumblebees. Now, this group is wasp. And people think that when they get stung, that they've been stung. They say, I got stung by a bee. However, most of the time, 90% of the time, you've actually been stung by a wasp. Many wasps look like bees, or we don't see them up close. But wasps belong to this order of Hymenoptera as well, which includes all wasp species have social species like our honeybees. They have parasitic species where they live off the host of another. And then they have solitary species as well. So they exhibit great variations in structure, physiology, and behavior. Unlike bees, wasps have a pointed lower abdomen and a very narrow waist that separates the abdomen from the thorax. Wasps tend to be less hairy than bees, making them less efficient at carrying pollen. Wasps are very carnivorous, but they need sugar and water for their high energy needs, and they often obtain these from flower or nectar or honeydew produced by insect herbivores. Some wasps are generalist pollinators, meaning they passively transfer pollen while feeding on nectar, and they overlap other pollinators like bees, flies, and butterflies in helping with that. Certain wasp species are very excellent pollinators and more efficient than their fuzzy-haired bee cousins. Some wasps have evolved to collect in provisional larval cells with pollen and nectar similar to bees. So interestingly enough, wasps have been around for millions of years and are central to reproduction of many wild and crop plants. So make sure that you appreciate these beautiful wasps. And I have the faces up of two different species of wasp here. And this is the same, like all the red on your left is the same species. But if you look at their faces, they're all different. Wasps can recognize each other by their unique facial patterns. This ability helps them navigate their complex social structures. If a wasp from another if this is a word I can think of, another group came into their grouping, they would know it by its face. They have facial recognition ability that rivals our own facial recognition. There are approximately 30,000 identified species of wasps that come in various shapes, sizes, and behaviors. I think it's so interesting though, when you look at their faces, how beautiful they are and how different they are, and that they recognize each other by faces, right? I think the important thing in protection and getting people to understand and have empathy towards them is to start to realize that these are individuals with individual faces and differences, which I find absolutely fascinating. But I think when we're quickly trying to identify what something is, because wasps do tend to sting so much more, it's those skinny little waistlines is a great way of identifying them. And if I have time at the end, I'll tell you some interesting story about murder hornets in Japan and that skinny little waistline and how it helped us in Washington State with some murder hornets that got into the US. All right, back to butterflies and moths belong to the same biological group called Lepidoptera. There are approximately 180,000 described species of Lepidoptera globally, but due to ongoing discoveries, there actually may be somewhere in between 300,000 and 500,000 different species. And enough, there are 10 times more moth species than butterfly species. Both butterflies and moths follow a similar life cycle: egg, caterpillar, pupa, and adult stages. And the duration of these stages are very different between species. Some species can have these stages they go through them within weeks, while others spend the winter as adults kind of using alcohol kind of like as an antifreeze, so they hibernate, so to speak. Butterflies are diurnal, the day flying, while moths are typically nocturnal, night flying. However, there are species of moths closely related to butterflies that even fly during the day. So they really complement each other on pollination. One doing it during the day, one at night. And the plants in North America, you can differentiate them. If you look up here, and I have another slide by their antenna. Butterflies have a clubbed antenna. It kind of ends in like a club, while moths have that feathery, beautiful cone-like antenna. Lepidoptera do not actively seek out pollen while feeding on nectar. Butterflies and moths unintentionally pick up pollen on their legs, on their proboscis, or their bodies, and they transfer this pollen from flower to flower, aiding in pollination. Butterflies are attracted to those brightly colored flowers and large heads that act as landing pads. Are highly sensitive to color and scent. Butterfly pollinated flowers are smaller, clustered, and copious nectar producers, and nocturnal flowers with pale or white flowers, heavy fragrance. Hover over flowers while others land. So they all have very interesting roles in the ecosystem. If you haven't loved a moth before, you take a look at these moths. I don't know how you can't fall in love with them. They are so cute. Moths are vital nocturnal pollinators for a multitude of flowers and plants. And raise your hand if you know the Miller moth. Miller moths, are usually, they come in hordes. They're flying around the lights. They get into people's houses and people don't like them. And we try to say people that they have a purpose in the ecosystem, right? All of our bird friends are looking for moths to eat too. So they all have purposes. Moths frequent a variety of flowers. So they act kind of like generalist, unlike bees, which focus sometimes on a particular source. And their furry bodies gather pollen during feeding, which really helps plant reproduce. So moths indirectly boost crop yields by sustaining plant populations. Since the 1970s, moth populations have drastically decreased due to land use changes, pesticide application. There's an urgent need for conservation initiatives to safeguard these overlooked pollinators. So when you observe a moth in flight, consider its vital contribution to our ecosystem. Montana, there was a study going on in Montana for bats. They started finding the moths that they were eating. They wanted to know what types of moths they were. Montana really hasn't, still collecting data about what's out there, even in the United States, about the types of species. 2 new species in Montana were recently found just by people going out and collecting them and sending them to CSU. So we still don't know everybody who's out there. And so we're still figuring all of this out. But as you can see, they're quite diverse and quite cute. Then we have flies, Diptera. So flies are also quite diverse, and they usually undergo a rapid development process, allowing their populations to grow swiftly in favorable conditions from egg to adult. They are essential pollinators, while often overlooked. They visit flowers, stoke upon energy-rich nectar and protein-rich pollen, and they transport that pollen from flower during their foraging process. Flies primarily pollinate small flowers that bloom under the shade and in seasonally moist habitats. Flowers visited by flies are typically pale or dull or dark brown, and sometimes their blossoms often emit putrid odors resembling rotting meat, carrion, or dung. So flies tend to be attracted to those flowers that smell. And flowers, there are some flies that mimic bees, and they masquerade as bees for wasp. However, a keen eye can distinguish them. Flies have 1 pair of wings, while bees and wasps have 2 pairs. And bee flies are very comical, robust, and extremely hairy with tongues as long as their bodies. So they're really fun if you can ever see them. Flies contribute to pollination of at least 70% of food crops. So in some environments where bees are scarce, flies are the dominant group of pollinators. So the next time you see a fly buzzing around, remember they too have a vital role in supporting plant reproduction. For some reason I wanted to show you some bee hoverflies and robber flies. So they mimic bees and mimic hornets. Very adorably cute, but these guys that you're looking at are actually impersonators. Impersonating both a bee, and then on the right is a robber fly, and he is mimicking the patterns, and they prey and pounce upon and capture other insects in mid-flight. So they're trying to fool other insects. I found them rather cute. Beetles. How many of you thought of beetles as pollinators? Beetles were among the first insects to visit flowers and remain essential pollinators today. They are especially important for ancient species like magnolias and spicebush. Beetles may not be delicate because as they eat their way through petals and other floral parts, they leave their mark by defecating within the flower. So they've earned the nickname mess and soil pollinators because as they're taking pollen from one plant to another, they're making a mess. Research has shown that beetles are capable of color vision. Their ability to perceive colors help them navigate and find suitable flowers. Flowers visited by beetles tend to be bowl-shaped with sexual organs exposed, dull white or green, and strongly fruit and scent, and mostly open during the day. So moderate nectar producers. So many large flowers like magnolias. So, but that top one in the middle is a milkweed beetle, and you'll often find him on, is that not the cutest face you've ever seen? You'll find him on milkweed. Absolutely adorable. And then we also have so those are our pollinators. So their powers are within their hairy bodies, their sight. So nectar guides, these intricate visual cues found in some flowers are a testament to the precision of nature. These nectar guides are markings that serve as a direct path for pollinators to a nectar source. So good pollinators with their excellent vision are able to navigate and find the right flowers. A fascinating example of the intricate relationship between flowers and pollinators. And they're saying even now that pollinators will even know when, if a plant has been recently visited by another pollinator and they move on to another one by perhaps something left behind. So that's all very fascinating. They have the right mouth parts. They have a sense of smell. So we call them, with the children, we like to say it's their superpowers. So these are some of the pollinator superpowers. Plant powers. So plants, again, leave nectar guides, and it's patterns and lights. There's a book out, and I'll try to remember it here in a second to tell you about it. It just came out. It is one of the most incredibly beautiful books that show what the pollinators see when they're looking at flowers, how they see a flower, what is that guide that the plant is bringing them in. And then, of course, many flowers emit very distinct fragrances to attract the pollinators. It's the shape of the plant, their visual cues, some of their the patterns on their petals direct pollinators straight toward the nectar. These patterns are light. Orchids are very fascinating in that they attract a bee in by, if you look inside the orchid, it almost looks like the face of another bee. So they attract them in by, if you look at the orchid, they have little eyes and it looks like they have a little bee face. So they can attract pollinators in by the way that they look. So how do we create a pollinator haven for all of these individuals? And one way is, the most important way is, we have to choose native plants adapted to your region or climate and the soil condition. Native plants will provide that nectar and pollen for pollinators that serve their larval host for their plants, for their butterflies and other insects. We have to select a variety of plants that bloom at different times of the year, ensuring a continuous supply of food for pollinators throughout the season. We also have to provide shelter and nesting sites, which includes shrubs, trees, wildflower patches to offer shelter and nesting spots, putting deadwood out or leaf litter and brush piles to provide a habitat for solitary bees and other insects. And this is the hard part, to avoid pesticides and herbicides and really try to minimize or eliminate chemical pesticides and herbicides, which can harm pollinators and disrupt their life cycle. Water sources is going to be another huge key for them. Install shallow, and I've got some pictures of this on in some next slides, but installing a shallow water source such as a bird bath. But in the bird bath, you need to put in rocks, because otherwise they need something to stand on to be able to drink the water. And pollinators need that water both for drinking and for cooling. And that's also why they need a lot of the shade spots as well. So we need to create, if possible, a mix of sunny and shaded areas. Some pollinators are going to prefer the sun, while others seek refuge in the shade. And then the other thing is, if you do all of this in your yard, right, pollinators will have a spot to stop to get food and drink to go on. And what we like to say is like, we need to create these like restaurant stops or truck stops right along the way for them. That if yours is the only one in your neighborhood, then they've got to go someplace else. And so really talk to your neighbors about it as well, to share and educate your knowledge once you start learning about this. Because every small effort counts, and together we can create these natural habitats or these national parks in your backyard for these little guys. And that's really what is going to be our guide. So native plants, and I'm going to give you resources for finding them for all, because everybody has different plants that are going to be needed, but planting native offers numerous benefits for both the environment and our well-being. Here's some compelling reasons to choose native species. Native plants support the local ecosystem. It takes thousands of years. I found this absolutely fascinating, for bees for the right type of pollen. So if you were to eat junk food only for the rest of your life, you're not going to be very healthy. And your offspring, if we were to eat junk food nonstop, our offspring would also not be very healthy. And native plants are health food, right? Thousands of years have gone down in evolution to create the right types of pollen, the right types of nectar for these pollinators. If we only give them junk food, they might be able to survive for a little, but declining population. So they really need these native species to support the local ecosystem. And if we don't have the insects in your ecosystem, you're not supporting your bird population either. So birds is another indicator that our insects are declining, because our bird populations are dwindling. But native plants don't usually require as much water. So native plants are adapted to that local climate and soil conditions. And they generally request, once they get established, have less water requirements, reducing the need for irrigation and conserving water as a precious resource, which for many of us, and depending on where you're at in the country, can be a problem. They're usually low maintenance once they take root, and they typically need minimal care for upkeep. And native plants offer beautiful flowers, abundant fruits, and vibrant seasonal color changes. Although traditional lawns often rely on chemical pesticides and herbicides, native gardens can reduce the needs for these chemicals, creating a healthier space for people and pets. And they're usually climate resilient. So we really need to try to go greener and establish some more sustainable landscapes. So here are some steps to get started. And I'm going to give this resource, and then Kathleen, if I'm right, you can share out, like if I send links to you at the end, you can send it to everybody at the end. So I've got some great resources that you can go in, put in your zip code, and it will show you the native plant supplier in your area, as well as the native plants. And it will show you trees, shrubs, and flowers. So a really great online resource is Native Plant Finder from the National Wildlife Federation. It also, that particular website will also give you native plant suppliers. And it's really important that you ask your native, if you've got native plants. You might go to Walmart and they might say we have native plants, but you need to guarantee that they have not been sprayed with pesticide. And so it's really important that your supplier of native plants is reputable, and they're very serious about making sure their native seeds have not had chemicals sprayed on them. And then selecting the right location. So observing your garden, which I'm sure if you're on here, many of you know what part of your garden is light during the day, how many hours it gets. But if not, observe your garden. Where's shade? How many hours does it get? So making sure that we choose the right location in the first place. You can easily test your soil, usually taking it into a lot of your native plant suppliers will know somebody that can test your soil, or your local extension office or local universities. I know Purdue in Indiana and CSU in Colorado, but there's many of them throughout the country that can test your soil for free. And making sure that you start with those easy native plants, and consider you can even do container gardening. So this is not just for, we try to tell people who are living in Denver here in Colorado, like, do container gardening from your apartments. Whatever you do, we have even found that native bees and can be found in downtown Denver for people who are planting native species out on their decks. So even that is important. And what is really important is that you plant in groups. You need groups of 3 to 5 together, because these native plants host usually larvae for caterpillar, for the butterflies, right? And food sources. And they usually need a lot of food. So don't just get one plant of each type. Make sure you plant in groupings, and you're planting in 3 to 5. Butterfly Pavilion does provide, if you're like, oh, I don't want to design my own garden, I just don't want to even think about that. There might be other sources near you as well, but we do provide native garden consultation for homeowners. We do a lot for businesses, but we do it for homeowners as well. But really plant in groups, and then water wisely. They're usually adapted to the local conditions, so you want to make sure that you don't overwater them. And you water deeply and infrequently to encourage that deep root growth. You definitely are going to want shrubs and trees. And I'm going to recommend a book to you that is also really great. And we are hosting Doug Ptolemy. How many of you read Nature's? Yep. Nature's Best Hope. If you have not, I highly recommend you read this book. It's incredible. And Doug is going to be speaking in May, and we'll be on talking more in depth again about how do we plant to really create a national park in your backyard. So oak trees are huge, and he talks again about, like, let's not have one oak tree, but we need to have 3 oak trees, right? And that's a lot of trees. So if you can't do that, and then many of us like to go out and get trees that are already established, but that's not going to be helpful, because for those 3 oak trees to stand that force of heavy winds against each other, those roots need to grow together when they're little. So, and intertwine, so that when they grow up, it's a strong structure that's going to withstand bad weather. It's when we buy trees that are already 10 foot, 20 foot tall, that those trees topple in bad weather. So if you can think to the future and think, where can I plant 3 oak trees? Oak trees are one of those keystone species across the country that support lots of life. And we're going to be getting ready to talk about keystone species here. But again, it's encouraging that deep root growth. So in our shelter and nesting spots, we want to include shrubs and trees and those wildflower patches to offer shelter and nesting spots. And I think the hard thing today is that HOAs, I know they're all around, right? They have a particular idea of how something should look, and they're really not thinking about what's really good for the environment or what's good for pollinators. And so we need to be spreading education to HOAs. And we have whole communities here in Colorado starting, and this can get started in other states as well, where we're certifying new communities as pollinator districts. And so as new communities are being built, they're going in with the idea and consulting with us before they go in that it's all pollinator native habitat being planted. And then educating some people, if you have native habitat, they're like, oh, that looks like, weeds, but it doesn't have to look like that. We know that there are regulations and HOAs, so there are ways of planting native habitat in clumps and groupings to make it look really nice. That hopefully will get by your HOA if you have one. And it's those keystone species, again, for your area. But remember, every native plant you add to your yard contributes to a healthier environment to support local wildlife plants. I moved into my house a couple years ago, and the only species of birds I have in my backyard are sparrows. And when I look around my yard's going to get a transformation this year. The gentleman who planted it before it's all roses. There's nothing that's native. So as things die, or I'm going to move things around, I'm going to plant more native species so I can support native wildlife and hopefully attract native birds as well. So intentional use of native plants will form that symbiotic relationship with the native wildlife, and will attract those species of birds that you want in your yard as well. Again, just those pollen and nectar sources, larval host plants. When I lived in Florida, we planted all types of kinds of vine around the house, and it attracted pipevine butterflies, and which was a source for their larvae. And also it was, think of it in a minute, it's like literally my favorite fruit that grows, passion fruit. And I saw all the larvae, and this was before I was knowledgeable about larvae, but I saw all the larvae eating all of the vines of the passion fruit. But I'm like, you know what? They need food too. And luckily my heart was about animals at that time too, before I knew about how essential was. So we need to provide food for those really hungry caterpillars. They eat so much. And monarchs, planting that, those foods, you need a lot of food for those young larval host plants. So whatever you plant, make sure you plant enough of it, and that you're willing to accept that your butterfly friends have to be caterpillars first, right? So oh no, sorry, went too far. The things that you're going to be looking for in your plants is you're going to be looking for nectar-rich blooms, pollen for protein. Our forbs provide that. They're larval hosts for plants, and they have a diverse bloom. And so when you're going into the native plant store, you're going to ask, what times of the year do they bloom? You want to look for a diversity of types of blooms, because as we learned, all the different pollinators prefer different colors, prefer different sizes of plants. So you want to try to create diversity for all of the invertebrates, not just butterflies, but we want places for our flies as well. You're like, I don't know about that. And then shrubs are important. So native shrubs are going to offer shelter for birds, small mammals, and insects. And their dense foliage will provide protection from predators. And birds will often build their nest within the branches of those shrubs. They're going to be food sources. So shrubs are really a biodiversity hotspot. So you want to make sure that you include shrubs within your garden as well. And their native shrubs are often low maintenance. And again, there's going to be groupings of shrubs as well. And consider planting a mix to create a thriving habitat. So not just all one. So you get like maybe, if you can, 2 or 3 of one shrub and then 2 or 3 of another one. And throughout the yard, try to have a variety of shrubs. And that will create the shelter that the pollinators need. and your birds as well. Consider native grasses. So those are hiding spots for wildlife, including insects, small mammals, and birds. And that dense growth of grasses is going to really provide even more protective cover for predators and also protection from harsh winter conditions. And it's really important, I think, we try to manicure too well, and we cut those grasses down too early. We need to leave those grasses up over the winter time to provide that habitat that they need to survive the winter. So some of them will survive within those grasses over winter. And then birds, of course, will use that grass to construct nest. And then many grasses produce seeds. That's a valuable food source for birds and the insects. And it will attract various species of birds to your yard as well. Again, supporting biodiversity in your yard that's what we all want. And ground cover is important as well. So some of those areas that you are great ground cover for the insects and the birds. The ground cover will play a crucial role in the ecosystem by producing berries, seeds, or fruits. And that will again attract all types of individuals. All right, shelter. So providing nesting sites, wild bees nest in various places, including in the ground, the stems of some of those native grasses, and in dead wood. So if you have a rotting log or a piece of dead wood that you can put and make your area look really attractive, those dead pieces of wood are great places for them to go in and to nest. And many of us like to, including my yard, if you went out there right now, which has changed, like to put up mulch. Mulch prevents, you need to leave bare spaces because native bees, solitary bees that are going into the ground they can't find a nesting site if you have mulch everywhere. So mulch is absolutely will deter all solitary bees from your yard. And if you want to provide homes for them, you need to provide places that they can nest. And so one is leaving places maybe around fountains, find strategic places under trees. And you'll know you have a nesting spot if you see holes. Start looking for holes in the ground. You'll know you'll have nesting bees there. You can also, if you have space, build a little dry laid rock wall. The crevices in these walls are perfect nesting places for bumblebees and other pollinators. Dead wood also will provide those places that they can burrow into and kind of give a natural edging, kind of that beautiful natural look. 70% of all bees will nest in the ground. So again, that undisturbed soil for ground nesting bees. And you want to avoid rototilling or applying pesticides and preserve that habitat of that bare ground there. And then they can nest in hollow or pithy stems. So instead of cutting down plants in the fall, wait for the bees to emerge in the spring before cutting down those stemmed plants. And instead of using wood mulch around trees and shrubs, consider using a layer of leaves that's 1 to 2 inches thick. Leaves provide insulation and protection for the larvae of many insects, including fireflies, goldenrod beetles, and moth and butterfly chrysalises. So that's one thing I don't do, is I don't break up my leaves in the fall. I leave it, and I make sure that spring and everybody is out. And so we'll clean up our leaves probably in the next 3 to 4 weeks and start cleaning them up to make sure that the larvae and insects that are in those leaves have can safely arrive. And then native perennials planted under trees can also create a soft landing for pollinators and beneficial insects. A lot of times, the larvae of different butterflies will travel from their host plant that they've been eating on and build their chrysalis on like a tree or someplace nearby or a shrub. So that's why those shrubs and trees are important. And then if something happens, as they come out, how they have to stretch their wings and dry them for a couple hours. If you have some native perennials and if they've decided to create their chrysalis up in the tree, they would have a soft landing if something were to happen and they drop down. Overwintering bumblebee queens. How many of you knew that the whole hive of bumblebees die over winter except for the queen? So everybody but the queen dies. But she needs to overwinter. So she'll seek out leaf litter. And so leaving leaves undisturbed is really crucial for the bumblebee population. It could be why our bumblebees are in close to, they're in huge decline. Bees need that leaf litter, the queen does, to come before she comes, for the winter time. And plant densely, create those native grasses clumped together so to provide additional shelter. Again, rocks in sunny places where pollinators can rest and warm up. Pollinators can't get warm on their own, so they need those rocks in sunny places to warm themselves. They're creating a small brush pile if you have space. It can serve as shelter for various wildlife, including pollinators. By providing shelter and nesting sites, you're supporting pollinators and you're also contributing to a healthier ecosystem. Water is important. So it's a pivotal role in life of pollinators. They need it to survive. It's just not about quenching their thirst, but it can also play a role in their daily physiological functions. So they need to cool off. So you see these butterflies on the bottom, it's called puddling. So they have fascinating ways of, they're also getting salts from the soil that they need. They taste, did you know butterflies taste with their feet? So they're also tasting when they're down there and they're figuring out what salts that they're doing. But they have very fascinating ways of managing body temperature through water. And this process is known as thermoregulation and it's vital for their well-being. So they need water to be able to do that. Just every single drop has helped. So with bees, a thing that students can do is with innate lids, you can have kids you can create them with stones, right? But you need to be able to give them a spot that they don't drown. So creating a little tiny bee spot, something very shallow for them with little pebbles or rocks in it is really important in making sure that that stays watered as well. So essential for all those little guys there. Space. Importance of connectivity refers to how well different green spaces are connected within an area. So if you do this in your yard and 2 or 3 houses down the way, somebody else does it, then we're creating connectivity. And that's important for the movement of pollinators. So studies have shown that well-connected urban green areas, parks, gardens, homes can positively impact pollinators' richness and abundance. Researchers have used satellite images to evaluate connectivity in various cities, emphasizing the importance of those green spaces and sun exposure. So pollinators, especially bees, rely on sunlight for thermoregulation and energy. So that connectivity is important. So what does that look like? So this is a typical area of home, and it's mostly, as you can look at this, lawn. So Doug Ptolemy, who's speaking on Nature's Best Hope, again, that's a virtual program that you can join. He calls it the Homegrown National Park. It's a movement that encourages individuals and communities to create a network of native habitats across the United States, that each and every one of us can do something today. And I think that's what's exciting about pollinator habitat. So many times with all the things in crisis, we think we can't do anything. This is one way that we can do something. It's a call to action to plant native plants and to create new ecological networks. The goal is to regenerate biodiversity and ecosystem function by covering 20 million acres of green lawns in the US with native plantings. Why does it matter? Because gardens in the past were designed for aesthetics, but now we need to do more. We need to support life. We need to sequester carbon. We need to feed pollinators. We need individuals to create healthier environments and a more sustainable planet. And that call to action is in now, and we really can't wait. So that is incredibly important. And keystone plants. So even if you don't have a yard, you can still be part of Homegrown National Park by planting keystone plants that thrive in containers on your balcony, on your rooftops, on your decks. Keystone plants are species that usually support the most species in your areas, making them essential for biodiversity. And then we want to share this knowledge with our neighbors so we can create that connectivity. Communities nationwide are pioneering this push for more native municipal habitats. The first municipal habitat in the country to be certified was in Manitou Springs. And so Butterfly Pavilion their whole city now has pollinator habitat. Their students are learning about pollinator gardening and pollinator habitat in their schools, and homeowners are planting native habitat, native plants. So Manitou Springs does not have to be the one and only. We can create, we also have a pollinator district in Broomfield, and now we have local communities that are seeing others doing it. We have the city of Lafayette, Fort Collins now are asking us. So it's like one of those movements that there's really not a downside to, that people are catching on to. So it's encouraging to let that know. Again, our threats to our pollinators are all the things we've already talked about. Monocultural farming, disease, pest, habitat loss, pesticide use, climate change are all the threats that many of you know about. But you, again, have that ability to create positive impact. You can create native bee homes as well, which is on your left if you look at that. One of the things I want to remind you, though, about is that wasps are predators, right? That wasp will go in and destroy a native, like eat the larva out of native bee homes. So, and they'll spread diseases as well. So honeybees can spread diseases to the native bees. So when you're building a native bee home, those little blocks have to be cleaned out after the bees arrive in the spring. Each spring they need to be, new ones put in, but they're easy to read about. And we can even do a future class on how you create native bee homes. The only thing is, don't create large ones. Create small, because small ones, once a wasp will find solitary bee homes, they know where it's at, or once disease hits, it will spread to the whole, all of them in there. So the more smaller homes that you have throughout your yard, the better. So the one I have pictured is small, but you'll go online and you'll see some fairly large ones. I would suggest the smaller, the better, because then it provides more chances if a wasp does find your native bee home, that the others will not be found. And that if disease does hit one of your homes, it doesn't hit the rest of them. So, and then leaving bare space again, and all of us can go out and provide water structure. Those three things are all things I bet every one of us could do today. Pollinator friendly practices, plant native flowers, reduce pesticide use. If you do any type of spraying at all, make sure it's done in the late afternoon, early evening, when most pollinators are done throughout the day. But remember what I told you about moths. They're not, you know, so even if you do it at early evening, you have a chance of hitting all your moths. So that's why that is still a problem. Provide nesting sites. If you beekeepers, and I can answer questions about bees, we can talk about that, question and answers, and then spreading this education to neighbors. We were all meant to be naturalists, each in our own degree. So it's full of marvels. If you have not, this is something else we can do. How many, raise your hand if you've heard of iNaturalist? Have not? Oh, Kathleen, we might need a part 2. And the other thing we could do is just really talking about native plants, but I'm going to go right back to questions. I should have questions after this, but some of the resources I want you to go to is Homegrown National Park. That website is by Doug Ptolemy, Nature's Best Hope. And it has, he lists on his website, if you go to the resource section, all of the native bee you can find, you can put in your area. You can find native plant growers, ones that are reputable. You can find extension sites for your state. So it's going to support everybody on here. And then you can also reach out to Butterfly Pavilion at environmentalbutterflies.org is our website. But we also have a service called Environmental and Ecological Services on there that you can go and request, hey, I have no idea what to do. I've looked at all these other resources and I really want more support, and ask for native plant support as well. But I think you're going to find, if you like doing this kind of thing on your own, Homegrown National Park has lots of resources on there about where to get started. And again, the important thing for you to remember is to plant in groupings. If you can't plant a tree, what shrubs can I plant in groupings? What native plants, what grasses can I plant? And provide water sources. And you can provide solitary bee homes as well. And again, remember, those solitary bees don't sting as often. You almost have to grab them for them to sting you. All right, I am ready, Kathleen, for questions. Oh, hang on. I want to present you one more slide. Hang on. Give me one more. And that is my contact information, to give you a minute to look at that. And Doug Ptolemy wrote Nature's Best Hope. Again, phenomenal book. Can't say enough about it. That's the QR code if you want to join our session. You can also go to butterflies.org underneath education and adult programs. There's registration there. And it's going to be Tuesday, May 14th at 5 p.m. Mountain Time. But you can also contact me. I'm happy to answer any questions via email as well. Right now, Kathleen.
Trina, that was so amazing. I always learn a lot when we talk about things, and this has just been fabulous. And I mean, all those cute faces on the wasp. Who knew all these individuals? I mean, it's just, you gave us a look into this that I certainly hadn't seen before. So thank you so much. Julie, do we have any questions from the chat that we should cover?
I see one from Teresa. The question is, can you talk more about grouping plants, especially in container gardens? How many different plants and how many of each? I have very limited space on my condo patio.
Yeah. So then I would go to your native plant nursery and ask them what are some keystone species. what are those keystone species for our areas? And that's a plant that's going to support a variety of species. And so I would plant maybe two, depending on your pots, how big they are, but you would want 2 or 3 of those plants at least to start with. And then maybe some other native floral plants, but you want to start with those keystone species and provide them. And that's going to provide enough food and habitat for those individuals. And then you might want a different, if you can plant another 2 or 3 plants or small in a pot, see what you can do. I'm not sure how you're going to have to see what how far do they spread? How much space do they need? But if you can only do one, it's one more than they have right now. So I'm going to say, don't let that stop you, right? Depending on your space. But again, groupings, if you can, I would go, and the first thing, if I had limited space, is just find out what are the keystone species for my area.
Lauren, I see you have some questions. Would you like to speak? Unmute yourself. Lauren, unmute yourself.
There we
Top
go.
right corner, there you go.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
I have several questions. I'll be quick about them. When people talk about bagworms in trees, are they talking about chrysalis? What are they, bad caterpillars? Are they good caterpillars? What is a bagworm?
I think I know what you're talking about, because my background's education, not etymology. So that's why I have so much fun in all of this, because I get to learn so much.
Yeah.
But I think I know exactly what you're talking about. And so one of the things I want to caution people for, and so that's something that obviously we need to look up, is bagworms native or not native to your area? But they're probably, people don't like the sight of them. I know exactly what you're talking about.
Right.
But even most species belong in an area, right? So even what we would consider a pest species, usually, for example, I'll give you an example, gypsy moths are local or native, and something has happened that they've gotten out of control, right? So habitat loss, we've cut down too many trees, and so they would maybe be normally spread throughout many trees, but because we're in cities and we have very few trees, then it becomes a problem, because this species that have many areas to go to is now confined to a small area. I'll give you another example of Japanese beetles. Many of you know them, and they're incredibly hard to control. They don't respond to pesticides. They're out of control. They're a non-native species, and handpicking them. But there's all a balance that we have to think about. Is this species belong here? Can my trees survive? Will spraying that particular species harm other individuals more? So there's so many ethical and just environmental considerations to take part. So I would say now Google does such an incredible job, or your local extension agency can answer questions most effectively. Maybe cutting them down, if that's even a possibility, would be the best thing. So each one has to be taken on an individual case, because there's not one right answer, and all animals at some point or another belong someplace, and human activity has gotten them out of whack in some way. So we need to figure, how can we do least harm and most good, right? So how can we do the most good and least harm? And sometimes least harm means still that somebody's going to get hurt, but we have to do least harm for the benefit of the whole ecosystem. And so really thinking about, how am I impacting the whole ecosystem before just randomly going out and spraying. And
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
A second question I had is, I'm about to put up a hummingbird feeder. My last one leaked water. Will they invite wasps because they like sugar water?
They might. And so then you might also want to think about what we love our, and they do provide water along the way. And what plants can you add to your yard that also help support the hummingbirds?
Okay. And
so
then
looking for nectar-rich plant. Yeah.
if you don't mind. I'm hearing that there are new hardiness zones, or that they've been redone somehow. Do you know something about that?
I still think that if you go to the hardiness zones are not going to be as important for your native plants
Okay.
because they're already adjusted to your area. Now, there are some things that are changing because of climate change. I would say most of your native plants, the hardiness zones have been created because we all like our showy, beautiful plants. And so we brought them in from all over, right? But our native plants are already suited for your area. So if you buy native plants, you don't have to worry about hardiness zone.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Yeah. Hope that answered your question.
Yeah.
If anyone has a question, use your hand up and it brings you to the top so we can see that you're interested in asking a question or making a comment. Anybody? Well, I know we're kind of running short, but and I'm so excited, and you will send us the information that I can send on to others. Would you
Yes.
like to say anything about some of the international stuff you're doing? I just think it's so incredible, and maybe just a couple of minutes on.
Yeah. So actually I have some friends here that I work with in Mongolia here at my house actually right now. But one of the projects that we're doing in Mongolia is with the Parnassus butterflies. There are 5 species of butterflies that are in critical peril and in danger. So we're doing work with our Mongolian scientists and friends to try to figure out what is the plight of the Parnassus butterflies and what can we do, and working with the local people in helping to save them. We're also working with bees and elephants in Tanzania. So we all think of elephants as this beautiful being. If you ask the people in Tanzania what they think of elephants, they probably wouldn't have the same thought that we do, because when they walk through the village and trample the homes and their crops, they don't think of them so highly, but we still do. And elephants deserve protection. Elephants have the same path that they've always walked on, but villages have come up in between, in hundreds of years, they walk the same path, but if a village comes up, they're still going to go through the village. So what we've done is they're incredibly afraid of bees. And so we've worked with the local people to create bee fences. So there's a hive, and then there's a wire that goes to the next beehive. And then if the elephants walk or get close by, it shakes the wire or it hits the wire. The bees come out and start buzzing. The elephants are incredibly afraid and they go another direction. So it protects the elephants from getting killed from the local villagers. It protects the local people because then they're not getting trampled. And it has brought from 300 since we've installed the fences, from over 300 incidences down to just 1 in the past year. So from 300 a year down to 1. And so, but they also then get to collect the honey and use it as a sustainable source for their villages too, and for their people. So that has another project. We have a butterfly farm in Sumatra where we're using the proceeds of that butterfly farm. It's the first of its kind ever. Butterflies there are traded as they are in Mongolia as well. People come from out of the country to trade butterflies, just like you would trade tusk. And because we're trying to flood the market with these particular butterflies, educate the local people, that money then goes back to buying up more rainforest to protect this one-of-a-kind area. The Lucerne area has more biodiversity than anywhere on the planet. And if we lose that, orangutans, it's the only area in the world that has orangutans, elephants, tigers, and how these particular type of monkeys all living in one place. Not to say that all of the invertebrates that we haven't even cataloged and found yet. So it's an important area in the world to protect. So we are down there trying to help them do that and protect butterflies as well. We have projects, stingless bees, where we're working with local ladies that will start this year as a source of income for them with stingless bees. And then protecting the monarchs and working with the Mexican consulate with monarchs and projects there. So literally projects all over the world. And then, of course, locally, we have so much going on here in Colorado as well. And we've done projects helping Florida with coral reefs. We've helped California. We have some projects there. So we've got a lot going on, but we're passionate about that. So thanks for asking, Kathleen.
I think that we're come to the end here. Let me just share my
I
screen.
have a question really
Go
quick.
ahead.
Are mosquitoes considered pollinators?
They are.
They are,
And
okay.
yeah, and there's only the female mosquito is the only one, and there are more males mosquitoes than females, but the female mosquito is the only one that bites, that sucks our blood. And
Oh,
then there are really better ways of doing, you can do, I obviously, somebody says, is there a compassionate way to kill a mosquito? And I would say fast, if you have to, right? As quickly as possible. But there are ways to prevent them from breeding by, there's things that you can put in water so that if you have water sitting around, that the larvae never develop. So there are compassionate ways. Spraying is the worst way ever to kill mosquitoes, and they're doing it in Florida like crazy, and probably in other states as well. But it is the worst way of getting rid of mosquitoes because it impacts not only mosquitoes but other invertebrates. All that spray and insecticide is going on your house, your skin, so all of that is negative. And so I would say that if you have spraying that happens around you, I would really look into what are they using and investigate that, and not be told that it's safe, and really make sure that it's safe for your children, your pets, and other invertebrates in your area.
thank you.
Good question, Julie.
Okay. Yeah, I'm trying to okay. My computer is moving slow today. So, Shartrina, that was just so amazing. And I'm sure everybody enjoyed it as much as I did. And maybe we will have a second session on this. I would like to encourage everyone to stay connected with us. Our mission is to encourage people to be compassionate and supportive of all animals. And we have the website, and we encourage everyone to go to uuam.org. You can sign up for our newsletter there. We are a 501c3, and if you want to promote more programs such as that, please donate and keep us in mind as you are looking for things to do. And you can be sure to sign up for our newsletter, because our next programs will be in the newsletter. Also on our website, you can see past programs that we've had. So we encourage everyone to do this and stay in touch with us. In closing, I just like to say, may we all live in the spirit of ahimsa, the nonviolence towards all living beings. And thank you so much for spending your Sunday afternoon and evening with us. Thank you so much, everybody. And thank you so much, Shartrina. Learned a lot. And I'll be in touch with the follow-up information to everybody.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Good night.
Good night.
Thank you.